The letter was typed in Comic Sans, and somehow that made it worse. I'm standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, still in the clothes I slept in, holding this piece of paper that my neighbor Karen Whitfield apparently typed up, printed, and personally walked over to slide under my front door sometime before 7 a.m., and I'm reading it in Comic Sans. 12-point. Pink header. The words nuisance and health hazard and community standards are all in there, and every single one of them is in Comic Sans. Like she drafted this formal legal threat on a computer last used to make a birthday party flyer for a 9-year-old. I set it down on the counter. I picked up my coffee. I looked out the window at my smoker sitting in the backyard, a perfectly reasonable offset smoker I'd owned for 4 years without incident. And I thought, you know what? I've been pretty patient about all of this. Let me back up. My name is Derek Malone. I'm 38 years old. Live on just under a half-acre lot in Maumelle, Arkansas, which is a suburb of Little Rock that's mostly families, a few retirees, and the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other from their driveways, but nobody actually knows anybody's middle name. I've been in the house 6 years. My job is HVAC. I install, service, and repair heating and cooling systems for a company called Dillard Climate Solutions, which is owned by my boss Ray, who is a decent man who has never once complained about my cooking. I bring leftovers in on Mondays and the guys fight over them. That's the kind of cook I am. I do barbecue. Specifically, I do low and slow offset smoking. Brisket, pork shoulder, ribs, the occasional whole chicken when I'm feeling lazy. I've been at it since my mid-20s, and over the years I've gone from burning things on a kettle grill to running a pretty serious setup, a mid-range offset smoker I got off a guy in Conway for $400, modified the intake, added a better thermometer suite, and spent about 200 weekends dialing in. It's not competition-level equipment. It's not small, either. But it's mine. It sits in my backyard, and on Saturday mornings when I fire it up at 6 a.m. and the smoke starts rolling, I feel like the world is a reasonable place. Karen Whitfield moved in next door 3 years ago. For the first year and a half, we got along fine. She's maybe 55, retired from something in pharmaceutical sales, keeps an immaculate yard, has a screened porch on the side of her house that faces my property, and she owns 3 small white dogs whose names I can never remember. Her husband Todd works in insurance, is about 6'1", has the specific kind of quiet that suggests decades of conflict avoidance, and makes the best eye contact with the ground I've ever seen. They seemed fine. I brought them ribs once in the beginning. Karen smiled and said thank you, and I thought that was that. Then, somewhere around 18 months ago, something shifted. I noticed Karen watching me more on smoke days. Not waving, just watching. I'd catch her through the fence slats, standing on her screened porch with her arms folded, not doing anything, just observing my smoker the way a person observes a piece of furniture they've decided they hate but can't figure out why yet. Then came the first conversation. It was a Saturday in March, cold enough that I had a jacket on, and I was pulling a brisket at about 6 in the morning because I'd started it at 10 the night before, and it had been on for 8 hours, and the internal temp had just hit 204 degrees, and I was not going to apologize for the timing. I was standing there with my Thermapen in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, watching the smoke drift up and over the fence in the lazy gray way it does in cold air. Feeling like an absolute king of my own small kingdom, Karen appeared at the fence. She didn't say good morning. She said, "Derek, I need to talk to you about this." I looked up. "Morning, Karen. What's up?" "This," she said, gesturing broadly at my smoker, at my yard, apparently at the general concept of what I was doing. "The smoke. It comes right into my porch. I can smell it on my furniture, on my dogs." "I mean, yeah," I said. "It's a smoker. It's a nuisance," she said. "It's affecting my quality of life." I took a sip of coffee. "Karen, I've been doing this for 4 years. This is the first time you've brought it up. I've been tolerating it," she said. I blinked. "Okay, well, I cook on weekends, usually Saturday mornings. I'm not burning trash. I'm not doing this at midnight. I'm cooking food, like brisket. That smell is brisket. I don't want brisket smell on my porch furniture. That's..." I stopped. I took a breath. "Karen, I don't really know what you want me to do here. This is my property. This is legal. I'm not violating any ordinance." "Not yet," she said. Then she turned around and walked back to her porch. I stood there for a second. I looked at my brisket. I looked at the fence. I said, "To no one in particular, not yet." I finished the brisket. It was excellent. I ate it alone because I was thinking too hard. 3 days later, I got a letter from Pulaski County Environmental Services. Karen had filed a formal air quality complaint. The letter cited a county residential outdoor burning ordinance, specifically a rule that prohibits open burning within city limits for recreational or waste disposal purposes, and informed me that a code officer would be contacting me within 10 business days to schedule an inspection. I read that letter 4 times. Then I did something Karen apparently did not expect me to do. I picked up my phone and I Googled for 20 minutes. I found the actual ordinance. I read the actual text. And there, in plain language that took me maybe 4 minutes to locate, was the exemption section. Cooking appliances, defined as any enclosed or semi-enclosed device used for the preparation of a food, including but not limited to smokers, grills, and outdoor ovens, were explicitly excluded from the residential outdoor burning restrictions. Not ambiguously excluded, explicitly. The county had been there before with this exact question and answered it in writing. I called the county environmental office directly. The woman who answered, after about 3 minutes on hold, confirmed cooking smoke from a food preparation appliance was not subject to the outdoor burning ordinance. If Karen wanted to file a complaint about cooking smell, she was welcome to, but there was no mechanism to enforce it. So there's no violation, I said. Correct, the woman said, even if my neighbor finds it unpleasant. Correct. Okay, so I said, thank you. I hung up. I looked out the window at my smoker. I stood there for a moment in the way you stand when a small problem has just become slightly larger and you haven't decided what kind of person you're going to be about it yet. I called Karen. Hey, Karen, I said. I looked into your complaint. Good, she said. Then you know you need to stop. Actually, no, I said. I called the county. Cooking smoke is explicitly exempt from the outdoor burning ordinance. There's no violation. I'm legal. Silence. I have a lawyer, Karen said. And I have a homeowners association, Derek, and I know how to use both. She hung up. I held the phone. I stared at it. Then I looked out the window at my smoker again, and for the first time I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly. More like the sensation you get when someone moves a chess piece and you realize the game is no longer casual. She was not going to stop. Fine. That was fine. But I want to be clear about something. What came next? All of it. I did not plan in advance. It came to me slowly, in stages, the way a good brisket comes together. A long time at low heat, and then suddenly it's done. The HOA letter arrived about 2 weeks after the phone call. Our neighborhood has a homeowners association. Technically, it's called the Maumelle Estates Community Association, but mostly, it's Larry Stubbs, a retired middle school vice principal, who takes the bylaws very seriously and schedules quarterly meetings in the community room of the neighborhood's original developer sales office, which still has carpet from 1994. Larry had sent me a formal nuisance notice, citing Article 6 of the HOA bylaws, which prohibited residents from creating excessive noise, odor, or other conditions that unreasonably interfere with the quiet enjoyment of neighboring properties. The language was deliberately vague. Excessive. Unreasonably. These are not defined terms. They never are in HOA bylaws because vagueness is the point. It gives the board discretion, which in practice means it gives the board the ability to enforce whatever whoever complained loudest wants enforced. I read Article 6 about a dozen times. Then I went to the quarterly meeting. It was held on a Thursday night. I got there at 7. Karen was already there, sitting in the front row in a blazer, which I thought was a serious escalation for a community room with 1994 carpet. Larry was at the folding table up front. The other 2 board members, a woman named Cheryl, who mostly looked uncomfortable, and a man named Bob, who coached youth baseball and seemed like he would rather be anywhere else, were arranged on either side of him. About 11 other neighbors were there, some of whom I recognized, most of whom seemed to have shown up out of curiosity. Karen made her case first. She talked for 10 minutes. She used the word pervasive 4 times. She had a printed-out photo of her screened porch that she held up for the room, though what it was supposed to prove, I couldn't entirely tell because it just looked like a screened porch. She said the smoke was affecting her respiratory health. No documentation, no doctor's note, just the statement, and that it constituted a clear violation of Article 6. Then it was my turn. I cook on Saturday mornings, I said. I have done so for 4 years. The county has confirmed in writing that my cooker is legal under all applicable environmental ordinances. I don't know what excessive means in this bylaw, But I'd suggest that 4 years without a single complaint from anyone in this room except Karen suggests it's not excessive. Larry looked pained. He is the kind of man who does not like conflict, which is a genuinely unfortunate trait for someone who runs an HOA. Derek, he said carefully, the board has received a formal complaint. We're obligated to address it. Address it how? I asked. We'd like to issue a formal warning. A warning about what? I'm not violating anything. About the odor, Larry said. The smell of brisket, I said flatly. The odor, Larry repeated. Bob, the baseball coach, looked at the ceiling. Cheryl took a very long drink from her water bottle. The board voted 3-2 to issue the warning. Larry and Cheryl voted yes. Bob voted no. The 2 remaining board members, one of whom I'd brought smoked ribs to last July, split along the same line. I walked out with a piece of paper in my hand that said I had received a formal nuisance warning for cooking food in my own backyard. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Gwendolyn Tate. She'd been recommended by a coworker whose landlord had tried some business with his lease that didn't go anywhere once Gwendolyn got involved. I went in for a 1-hour consult and told her the whole story, front to back, and she listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting. So small I couldn't read it from across the desk. When I was done, she set down her pen and looked at me. The HOA warning, she said, is almost certainly unenforceable. The language in Article 6 is so vague that any judge would apply a reasonableness standard, and cooking on a residential property in a way that the county has explicitly cleared as lawful is by definition reasonable. If they try to fine you, we'll challenge it and we'll win. Okay, I said, that's good. However, she said, fighting it will cost you money and time. You'll win eventually, but eventually might be 2 years from now. I looked at her. So what are my options? She leaned back slightly. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck, and the particular steady quality of someone who spent their professional life finding levers other people hadn't noticed. You have 2 options. Option 1, you do nothing, they do nothing. This simmers until Karen gets tired or moves away. Option 2, you respond. Respond how? That, she said, depends on what you want the response to look like. I thanked her and paid for the consult and drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table with the HOA warning and the county exemption letter and the original Comic Sans note, all 3 of them lined up in front of me, and I thought about it for a while. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Cody Brewer. Cody is his contractor. He runs a small crew that does residential construction, pads, additions, patios, the occasional outbuilding. We've been friends since high school, and he is one of those people who approaches every situation with the specific energy of a man who has never, not once in his life, thought a problem was unsolvable. He'd heard about the Karen situation from me in dribs and drabs, mostly over beers on my back porch while eating whatever was coming off the smoker. His text said, "You free tonight? I'll bring beer." He showed up at 6 with a 12-pack, and I told him the whole thing again. The HOA meeting, the lawyer, all of it, and he listened in the way Cody listens, which is with his head tilted slightly and a look on his face like he's already 3 steps ahead of wherever you are in the story. When I finished, he was quiet for a second. He looked at my smoker. He looked at the fence. He looked back at me. "Man," he said, "what if instead of fighting it, you just went bigger?" I looked at him. "Define bigger." He pointed at my smoker, "That thing. What's the biggest version of that? Commercially? There are units that'll do 500 pounds of meat. They're the size of a small car." Cody nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. "And could you technically run one of those on a residential property?" I opened my mouth to say no, then I stopped, because I didn't actually know. And if there's one thing the county exemption letter had taught me, it was that my assumptions about what was and wasn't allowed had been wrong before. "I don't know," I said. Cody cracked open a beer and handed it to me. "Then maybe you should find out." I found out. I'm going to be honest with you. I did not sleep much that night. I was up until almost 2 in the morning, cross-referencing Pulaski County's zoning ordinances, the Arkansas Department of Health's food business regulations, the county's home occupation rules, and a 1974 county resolution that I found referenced in a footnote of a footnote that turned out to be more relevant than anything else I read. Here's what I found. Pulaski County Zoning Code under Section 12.4.7 allows what it calls a home-based food enterprise as a by-right use on residential parcels under 1 acre. A by-right use means you don't need a special permit. You just have to meet the conditions. The conditions were: you had to hold a valid Arkansas Department of Health cottage food permit or commercial food handler's license. The operation had to be the secondary use of the property, meaning you still lived there. You could not have more than 2 non-family employees. And here was the critical part: your equipment had to meet county building and fire codes. The provision was from 1974. It was designed for people who wanted to sell jams and cakes and homemade bread out of their houses. It had never, as far as I could tell, been applied to a smokehouse. But it wasn't written for jams. It was written for food businesses, and a commercial smoker is a food business appliance. I found the specific provision distinguishing commercial food equipment from recreational burning devices in the county's own administrative guidance document, which was attached to a 2019 amendment to the Outdoor Burning Ordinance. The relevant section read, in part, that commercial food preparation equipment, including but not limited to gas-fired or electric smokers, ovens, and food processing units used in connection with a licensed food business, shall not be classified as outdoor burning devices and are not subject to the provisions of this ordinance. Not subject to the provisions of this ordinance. I read that sentence maybe 6 times. Then I found the phone number for Gwendolyn Tate's office, and I left a voicemail at 2 in the morning because I didn't want to forget anything before I fell asleep. She called me back the next afternoon. "I got your voicemail," she said, and there was something careful in her voice, like a doctor who has found an interesting result and isn't sure yet how the patient is going to take it. "I spent the morning looking at everything you cited. And, Derek," she said, "I think this is technically legal." A pause. "I want to be very careful about what I say next." "Say it anyway." "The home-based food enterprise provision in Section 12.4.7 is real, it's current, and it has not been superseded by any later ordinance. If you obtained the proper health permits and your equipment met code, you could operate a licensed food business from your residential property. The commercial equipment distinction means Karen's air quality complaint still doesn't apply. The HOA's nuisance language almost certainly doesn't cover a licensed, inspected, legally permitted food operation." "Almost certainly," I said. "I would need to do a more thorough analysis to give you a definitive answer. And I'd want to be present at any county discussions. But based on what I'm reading, yes. If you wanted to install a commercial smoker and operate it as a licensed food business, you appear to have the legal right to do exactly that." I was quiet for a moment. "How big?" I said slowly. "Do you think I should go?" There was a pause on the other end. I thought I heard her make a sound that might have been a very small, very professional laugh. "That," she said, "is not a legal question." I called Cody that night. "I need you to come over," I said. "Why?" "Because I need you to tell me if we can pour a commercial-grade concrete pad in my backyard." There was a short silence. Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." He came over, and I walked him through everything. We stood in the backyard in the dark with a flashlight and a measuring tape. Cody walked the property line. He measured the setback distances. The county required any accessory structure to be at least 6 feet from the property line, 5 feet from the rear. We measured everything twice. The location I had in mind, the back left corner of the yard, backed up against the fence that ran along Karen's property. "The proposed pad location," Cody said, doing the math in his head, "puts the structure face about," he counted on his fingers, 18 feet from Karen's property line. I looked at the fence. I looked at him. "And the code minimum is 6 feet. "The code minimum is 6 feet, he confirmed. "You've got 12 feet of buffer. Perfect." "It's also," Cody said, "the exact corner of the yard that's most visible from her screened porch." "I noticed that too," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he grinned. "Derek, I'm not doing anything wrong," I said. "I'm doing everything exactly right." "I know," he said. "That's the part that's beautiful." We talked through the build. A 10 by 12 concrete pad, 4-inch reinforced slab, broom finish. A small prep shed, 12 by 16. Pre-engineered metal building meets county requirements for food preparation structures. And the centerpiece, a Southern Pride SPK 500, a commercial rotisserie gas smoker with a 500-pound capacity, a 12-foot exhaust stack, and a ventilation system engineered specifically to disperse smoke at height rather than at ground level, meaning it would actually produce less neighborhood-level smoke than my existing offset. The irony of that was not lost on me. The exhaust system on that thing, I told Cody, is genuinely better for the neighbors than what I've been running. So Karen's complaint, Cody said, is going to result in less smoke at ground level. Technically, yes. He shook his head slowly. This is art, man. The next morning, I registered Malone's Smokeworks FLLC with the Arkansas Secretary of State. It cost $50 and took about 20 minutes online. I then applied for a commercial food handler's license through the Arkansas Department of Health, which required me to submit a food safety plan, a proposed equipment list, and a proposed facility layout. I spent a weekend on the paperwork. I was meticulous. Every form, every attachment, every supporting document. I'd spent enough time at Gwendolyn's office reading about regulatory processes to know that you do not give a bureaucracy any reason to find a hole. Then I called Southern Pride. The sales representative's name was Marcus, and he was based out of their Georgia office, and he had clearly spent his entire career selling commercial smokers to restaurant groups and catering operations and competition barbecue teams. Because when I explained that I wanted an SPK 500 delivered to a residential address in Maumelle, Arkansas, he went quiet for a moment in the specific way people go quiet when they're trying to figure out if they're being pranked. "Sir," he said, "is this for a restaurant that's being built?" "Or it's for my house," I said. "Your house, my house. I'm operating a licensed, home-based food business. The unit will be installed on a commercial-grade concrete pad with appropriate utility connections. I have a gas line that can support it. The exhaust stack will meet all local code requirements." Another pause. "How many pounds of capacity are you?" 500, I said. "The SPK 500, the SPK 500. A long pause. "Can I ask?" Marcus started. "My neighbor reported my backyard smoker to County Environmental Services," I said. "Twice. Then she got the HOA to send me a formal warning. I looked up the zoning code." There was a silence, and then Marcus from the Georgia office said, "Sir, I have been in this business for 19 years, and I have to tell you, this is one of the best calls I have ever taken." We worked out the specs, the delivery logistics, the installation requirements. The unit weighed just under 3,000 pounds. It would need to come on a flatbed and be craned into position over the fence line. Marcus said he'd coordinate with a local equipment rigger he'd worked with in the Little Rock area before. I filed the permit application with Pulaski County Planning and Zoning the following Monday. I walked into the planning office at 9 in the morning with a manila folder containing the permit application, the Section 12.4.7 zoning provision, the home-based food enterprise registration, the health permit application receipt, and the county's own 2019 administrative guidance document, distinguishing commercial food equipment from outdoor burning devices. I had organized them with tabs. Gwendolyn had reviewed everything the previous Friday. She had not laughed at any of it, which I took as a good sign. The permit coordinator was a woman named Donna Krebs. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain, a coffee mug that said, "Mondays? No thank you," and the expression of someone who had reviewed every possible kind of residential permit application and expected no surprises. She surprised easily. She read the application once. She read it again. She looked up at me. She looked back down. She picked up her phone and called someone and put me on hold for 11 minutes, during which I stood at the counter and looked at a bulletin board covered in zoning amendment notices and thought about brisket. The supervisor who emerged was a man named Phil Hartwell. He was the Assistant Director of Planning and Development for Pulaski County. He was maybe 45, wore a county-issued polo shirt with a small embroidered logo, and had the look of a man who was trying to appear calm while his brain was running very fast. "Mr. Malone," he said, shaking my hand, "can we step into the conference room?" We went into the conference room. He had my application. I had my folder. We sat across from each other like two people about to negotiate something neither of us had expected to be negotiating. "Walk me through this," he said. So I did. I went clause by clause through Section 12.4.7. I explained the home-based food enterprise provision. I explained the commercial equipment distinction. I showed him the 2019 administrative guidance document, which was, I noted, a document produced by his own office. He looked at it with the expression of a man who wished it didn't exist. "This provision," he said carefully, "was intended for small-scale operations, home baking, jams." "Mr. Hartwell," I said, "with respect, the provision doesn't say that. It says home-based food enterprise. It does not specify scale. It does not specify product type. My operation meets every condition listed." He looked at the document for a long time. "The equipment," he said. "A 500-pound commercial smoker that's very large for residential property. It meets setback requirements by a margin of 12 feet. The exhaust system is engineered to disperse at height and will produce less ground-level smoke than my current equipment, which the county has already confirmed is legal. I can provide the manufacturer's ventilation specifications. I slid them across the table. He looked at them. He kept looking for a reason to deny it. I watched him look. He was thorough. I'll give him that. He went through every condition in the provision, every applicable building code section, every health and safety requirement, looking for the thing that didn't fit. But Gwendolyn and I had been there first. We'd closed every door. Phil Hartwell set down the papers. He looked at me, then he looked at the window, then back at me. "Mr. Malone," he said, "I'm going to approve this application. The conditions are: you must pass a state health inspection of the facility before operating. You must maintain your commercial food handler's license in good standing, and I'm going to note in the record that commercial vehicle traffic for customer pickups must be limited to reasonable hours." He paused. "Define your intended operating model." "Weekend sales only," I said. "Saturdays, maybe occasional Sundays." He nodded. He wrote something down. Then he slid the application back across the table, unsigned, and said, "I'll have the approval letter to you within 5 business days. Thank you, Mr. Hartwell." I walked out of the county planning office at 10:37 in the morning on a Tuesday with an approved permit for a commercial smokehouse on a residential lot in Maumelle, Arkansas, and I sat in my truck for a minute in the parking lot and I said, out loud, to nobody, "Karen, you did this." Then I called Cody. "We got the permit," I said. "Let's pour concrete," he said. Construction started on a Friday. Cody brought his crew. Himself, a guy named Ricky who had been doing slab work for 15 years and had opinions about it, and 2 younger guys named Dalton and Jesse, who mostly did what they were told, and made good-natured jokes at each other's expense throughout the workday. They showed up at 7 with a concrete truck scheduled for 9 and a rented form-setting kit, and the specific organized chaos that characterizes any serious construction crew. Ricky, setting the forms for the pad, looked at the property line and then at me and said, "I've poured slabs for garages, I've done pools, patios, extensions. One time I poured a pad for a guy's personal batting cage, which I thought was the strangest thing I'd ever do." He leveled his forms from stake. "Never poured one for a man's vendetta." "It's not a vendetta," I said. "It's a business." Cody, carrying a length of rebar, said, "Same thing. Different permits," I said. Ricky shook his head slowly, but he was smiling, and he and Dalton and Jesse got the forms set and the rebar tied and the concrete poured and screeded, with the kind of precise efficiency that you only get from people who've been doing the same thing for years, and genuinely care about the quality of the work, even when the work is, admittedly, someone's vendetta. They were finishing the broom finish on the slab, the final texture pass that gives concrete grip, when a Pulaski County Sheriff's patrol car pulled up in front of my house. I knew before the deputy got out why he was there. His name was Officer Whitmore. He was maybe 30, professional, not unfriendly, with the calm manner of someone who's been dispatched on enough neighborhood calls to take nothing personally. He walked around the side of the house to the backyard and looked at Cody's crew and the fresh-poured slab and the form stakes and the rebar scraps. "Mr. Malone," he said. "That's me," I said. "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction at this address." "Happy to help," I said. I had the permit in my back pocket. I'd put it there that morning on purpose. I pulled it out and handed it to him. He read it. He flipped it over. He read it again. Then he looked at the slab, then at me. "Commercial smokehouse," he said. "Commercial smokehouse," I said. "County approved. Building permit, home-based food enterprise registration. Health permit application filed." He handed the permit back. He looked around the yard one more time in the way officers do when they're confirming there's nothing else to address. Then he said, "Y'all have a good day," and he walked back around the side of the house. He stopped at the corner. He turned back. "Do you do catering?" he asked. I looked at him for a second. "Working on it," I said. He nodded once and left. Cody waited until the patrol car pulled away, and then made a sound that was either a laugh or a cough. I couldn't tell. Ricky didn't look up from the slab. 240 square feet of concrete, he said to no one in particular. Just paid for by the county taxpayer. The health inspection was scheduled for 2 weeks after the slab cured, and the prep shed was up. The shed went together in a day and a half. Pre-engineered metal building, painted dark green at my request because I liked how it would look, insulated, with a utility sink, a stainless work surface, and the hand-washing station that the health code requires at the point of food preparation. The state health inspector's name was Marlene Chu. She arrived in a state vehicle at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, carrying a clipboard with about 14 pages of checklist attached to it, and she gave my setup the most thorough once-over I have ever seen any building receive in my life. She checked the water temperature at the utility sink. She checked the seals on the prep shed door. She checked the distance from the hand-washing station to the work surface. She checked the ventilation clearances on the exhaust stack location. She found one issue. The hand-washing station was positioned 2 inches too close to the edge of the work surface, creating what she described as a potential cross-contamination vector. It was a legitimate call. She gave me 48 hours to correct it. I had it corrected in 6. I called her. She came back the next morning. She walked straight to the hand-washing station, measured, confirmed the correction, and then did a second walkthrough of everything else just to be sure. At the end, she stood in the middle of the concrete pad and looked at the prep shed and the exhaust stack location and the whole setup for a long moment. Then she said, "In 15 years, I have never inspected a residential smokehouse. How's it looking?" I asked. "I'm signing off," she said. She made a note on her clipboard. "Don't make me regret it." "Yes, ma'am." She handed me the approval certificate, shook my hand, and left. I held the certificate for a moment. I looked at the empty pad. I called Marcus at Southern Pride. "We're ready for delivery," I said. "The rigger is confirmed for Thursday," he said. The SPK 500 arrived on a Thursday morning at 7:45 on a flatbed truck driven by a man named Gene, who had the resigned competence of someone who has delivered large and inexplicable things to strange places his entire working life. The rigger team, 3 guys, a crane truck, and a lot of rigging straps, showed up 15 minutes later. It took 40 minutes to get the unit craned over the fence and set on the pad. During those 40 minutes, I stood in my backyard and watched a machine the size of a compact car float through the air on rigging straps, rotating slowly as it went, and I felt the very specific feeling of a plan becoming real. I said nothing. I sipped my coffee. I looked at the fence. About 3 houses down, I could see the top of Karen's head above the fence line. A curtain moved. Deal 2 Volkt direct higher onder. I fired up the SPK 500 for the first time on a Saturday morning 3 days after delivery, at 5:30 a.m., because I had 16 racks of ribs, 4 briskets, and 8 pork shoulders to get on before sunrise if I wanted them ready for noon. Commercial smoking is not a casual endeavor. You are not making food for 1 person or 4 people or even 10. You are making food at a scale that requires planning, timing, a thermometer you trust absolutely, and the willingness to get up before the rest of the neighborhood has processed the concept of morning. The machine is quieter than you'd expect. The gas burners ignite with a clean hoomp and then settle into a low, steady hiss. The rotisserie rack turns with a slow mechanical precision that is deeply satisfying to watch. The exhaust stack, 12 feet of insulated stainless steel, pulls the smoke up and out and disperses it at altitude, so that at ground level, standing right next to the unit, the air is cleaner than it was when I was running the offset. What is not cleaner is the smell. 16 racks of ribs, 4 briskets rubbed in brown sugar, black pepper, garlic, and sea salt, 8 pork shoulders, all of them going into a 500-pound commercial rotisserie smoker, running at 225 degrees over cherry and hickory wood chunks. The smell by 6:15 a.m. had reached critical mass. It was extraordinary. It was the platonic ideal of what barbecue is supposed to smell like. It was the smell that should play in the background of every patriotic film. Montage. It was the smell of Sunday afternoons at someone's grandparents' house, multiplied by the commercial capacity of a licensed food operation. It drifted everywhere, including, given the prevailing wind direction that morning and the geometry of the 2 properties, directly into Karen Whitfield's screened porch. My next-door neighbors on the other side, the Nguyen's, materialized at my fence at about 6:45. Phuong Nguyen was holding a coffee mug and looking at the SPK 500 with an expression of pure reverence, and her husband Ben was slightly behind her, also holding coffee, wearing pajama pants. "Derek," Phuong said, "what is happening?" "I opened a food business," I said. "Can we buy ribs?" she said. "Noon," I said. "I'll have everything ready. I've got a square reader set up on the prep shed." She looked at Ben. Ben looked at her. They both looked back at me. "We're coming back at noon," she said, and they disappeared. By 8 o'clock, there were 3 other neighbors at various points along my fence or in my driveway asking questions. By 10 o'clock, my phone was ringing. Word had gotten out through the neighborhood Facebook group, where someone, I have always assumed it was Puang, had posted a photo of the SPK 500 with the caption, "Derek from Larkmore Drive opened a smokehouse. It smells incredible." The post had 47 comments by the time I saw it. At 9:45, Karen Whitfield appeared at my fence. I had been expecting this. I had, in fact, been looking forward to it in the specific way you look forward to something you've spent several months preparing for. I walked over to the fence with my tongs in my hand, and I looked at her, and I said, "Morning, Karen." She was wearing a bathrobe, and her expression had the specific quality of a woman who has arrived at a situation she is not yet fully processing. She looked at the SPK 500 for a moment. It is a genuinely imposing piece of equipment, nearly 7 feet tall, stainless steel panels, the exhaust stack reaching almost to the top of the fence line. It is not something you see in a residential backyard. It is something you see outside a restaurant or at a catering depot. "What," she said, "is that?" "That," I said, "is a Southern Pride SPK 500 commercial rotisserie gas smoker, 500-pound capacity, 12-foot exhaust stack with a dispersal rating of—" "Derek," she said, "shut it down." "Karen," I said, "I can't do that." "I will call code enforcement. You can absolutely do that," I said. "While you do, let me show you something." I walked over to the prep shed and came back with a folder. Gwendolyn had helped me build it specifically for this moment. I handed it through the fence. "That's my county-approved home occupation permit under Section 12.4.7 of the Pulaski County Zoning Code. Behind it is my commercial food handler's license from the Arkansas Department of Health. Behind that is the health inspection certificate signed by State Inspector Marlene Chu. Behind that is the county's own administrative guidance document from 2019 distinguishing commercial food equipment from recreational burning devices, with the relevant section highlighted." Karen looked at the folder. She did not open it. "The last page," I said, helpfully, "is a laminated summary. For easy reference." She looked at me. She looked at the folder. She looked at the SPK 500. "I don't believe this is legal," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I laminated the summary." She took the folder and walked back to her house. I watched her go. Then I went back to checking my briskets. She called the county at 10:30. I know because Phil Hartwell called me at 11, which I thought was impressively fast, to let me know he had received an inquiry from a resident about my permit, and that he had confirmed to the resident that the permit was valid and that my operation was in compliance with all applicable regulations. She asked if there was any process to challenge the permit, Phil said. "And?" I said. "I told her the challenge period had expired," he said. There was a pause. "Mr. Malone, I want you to know that I reviewed this situation very carefully before approving your permit." "I know you did, Mr. Hartwell. I want to make sure you're operating within the conditions I specified. Saturdays, limited hours, health permit current." "Yes, sir." Another pause. "Those ribs smell remarkable from the parking lot, incidentally. I drove past on my way in." "Come by at noon," I said. "I'll set some aside." He did not come by at noon, but I appreciated the sentiment. Karen tried the HOA next. She called Larry Stubbs sometime Saturday afternoon. Based on the voicemail Larry left me at 4:15, which I thought was both prompt and slightly apologetic in tone. Larry explained that he'd reviewed the situation and that the HOA's Article 6 nuisance language specifically covered recreational fires and open outdoor burning, not licensed food operations, and that he didn't spaces for HOA action. I called Larry back. "Thanks for looking into it," I said. "Derek," he said carefully, "I just want you to know that personally I think this is," he paused, "I think this is within your rights. I want to be clear about that." "I appreciate that, Larry." "The ribs," he said. Do you have any left?" I did. I set some aside for him. He came by at 6. He ate them on his car hood in my driveway and made a sound about halfway through the rack that I will not attempt to describe, but that I took as a professional validation. Karen called an air quality complaint line the following week. She had apparently found a county environmental complaint number that was separate from the code enforcement line, and she filed a formal report about air quality impacts from my operation. An inspector came out the following Thursday with a monitoring device that measured particulate matter and NOx concentrations at the property line. The readings were below baseline. This is the part where I need to explain something about commercial smoker engineering that I find genuinely satisfying. The SPK 500's exhaust system is designed for restaurant and catering use. where you cannot afford to have smoke pouring out at eye level onto customers or neighboring businesses. The 12-foot stack and the internal heat management system push combustion byproducts up and out at altitude, where they disperse before reaching residential breathing zones. My little offset smoker, which I'd been running for 4 years, produced more ground-level smoke than the SPK 500 at full capacity. The inspector, a man whose name I never caught, read his monitor, looked at it for a while, and then looked at me. "Sir," he said, "your readings are actually cleaner than the pre-installation baseline for this area." "I know," I said. He looked at the SPK 500, then at me, then at his monitor again. He made some notes. He asked if I had the manufacturer's ventilation specifications. I gave him the folder. He took photos of the relevant pages. On his way out, he paused and turned back. He said, "Do you have a business card?" The Malone Smokeworks business cards had arrived from the printer the previous Tuesday. I gave him one. By the end of the month, I had served 20 of the neighborhood's 34 households. The new ones were regulars. Fuang came every Saturday, and Ben came sometimes on Sundays when I did an occasional small batch. The family across the street, the Delacroix family, had started bringing lawn chairs and just sitting in my driveway while they waited for their pickup, which I hadn't planned for but found I didn't mind. Officer Whitmore's name appeared in my contact list because he'd texted to ask what time I started selling on Saturdays. The local news found me on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks in. A producer from Channel 7 had seen the neighborhood Facebook post and wanted to do a segment. I said yes because Gwendolyn told me to say yes. The segment ran on a Tuesday evening and was headlined, "Maumelle Man Turns Neighborhood Dispute into Legal Business Venture," and it featured an interview with me in front of the SPK 500 with my tongs and a brisket. And it was 11 minutes long, which for a local news segment is basically a documentary. My phone rang the morning after it aired. It was Ray Dillard, my boss. "My wife saw you on Channel 7, he said. "I heard that was a good segment," I said carefully. "She wants 2 racks for Sunday," he said. "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good," he said. "Also, good Lord, Derek, what did you do to that woman's porch?" Karen's petition came the week after the news segment. She circulated a printed document around the neighborhood asking residents to sign in support of a bylaw amendment that would prohibit, quote, "the installation or operation of commercial food preparation equipment on residential properties within the Maumelle Estates Community Association." She knocked on doors herself, apparently, because 3 different neighbors texted me about it on the same Thursday afternoon. The bylaw amendment required 2/3 support from the household membership to pass. There are 34 households in our association. You need 23 signatures. Karen got 8. I know because Larry called me somewhat nervously to let me know the petition had been received and what the vote count was. "I want to be transparent about the situation," he said. "I appreciate that, Larry," I said. 8 households, he said. "Right. You've served 20. Right." There was a pause. "Derek," he said, "I just want to say that the brisket on Saturday was genuinely exceptional. I've been thinking about it. The Todd situation happened on a Wednesday afternoon, about 5 weeks in. I was in the backyard doing some maintenance on the exhaust stack connection when I heard a tap at the fence. I looked up. Todd Whitfield was standing on the other side of it, which was so unexpected that I almost dropped my wrench. Todd is, as I've described, a tall man who has made a lifelong practice of avoiding confrontation. He was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, which is apparently just how Todd dresses at home, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at a point approximately 2 feet to my left rather than at me. "Derek," he said. "Todd," I said. He started. He stopped. He tried again. "I want to say, look, man." He took a breath. "I'm sorry about all this. For what it's worth, I know Todd. She gets something in her head," and he shook his head. "Anyway, I just wanted to say." "I appreciate it," I said. He nodded. He looked at the SPK 500. Then, like a man who has been thinking about something for a long time and has decided to just say it, "Can I buy a brisket?" I looked at him. "Karen doesn't have to know," he said. "Todd," I said, "I run a licensed food business with health permits and county approval. I'm not going to make you hide." He blinked. "Yeah, but she's out on Wednesdays," I said. "So the timing works out fine." He bought the brisket. He ate it, I assumes, somewhere in the house where Karen would not immediately notice. The following Wednesday, he was back for a pork shoulder. The Wednesday after that, he showed up with a small cooler and a sheepish expression and asked if I did sides. I added sides. Karen's lawyer sent me a letter in week 6. It was from a firm I'd never heard of, 2 paragraphs, asserting that my operation constituted a private nuisance under Arkansas common law and threatening civil litigation if I did not cease operations. Within 30 days, I brought it to Gwendolyn. She read it. She set it down on her desk. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "This," she said, "is a Hail Mary." "Good," I said. "They have nothing. A private nuisance claim requires unreasonable interference with the use and enjoyment of neighboring property. You have a county-approved permit, a state health certificate, air quality readings that are better than baseline, and a file of documented correspondence showing that the county has reviewed your operation and found no violation. They would need to prove that your operation is unreasonable despite all of that. They can't do it." She wrote a response. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, thorough, and the specific kinds of polite that is also somehow threatening. She faxed it, because the opposing firm had listed a fax number on their letterhead. And Gwendolyn had strong feelings about using the most formal available communication method in response to flimsy legal threats. The opposing lawyer never responded. My revenue in the first month of operation was $3,840. I did not quit my HVAC job. I'm not a fool. But $3,840 for cooking food I would have cooked anyway, on weekends, in my own backyard, was a meaningful number. I used part of it to buy a competition-grade wireless thermometer suite that could monitor 12 probes simultaneously. I used another part of it to have a sign made. The sign was 2 feet by 3 feet, exterior-rated aluminum, with a dark background and clean white lettering. It read, "Malone Smokeworks, licensed, inspected, county-approved." Beneath that, in smaller text, "Pulaski County Home-Based Food Enterprise Permit Number 1247-2024-0047. I had it mounted on a post in my front yard, facing the street. It also happened to face directly into Karen's driveway. The HOA hearing was called for a Tuesday in October, 7 weeks after my first Saturday of operations. Karen had filed a formal petition for a bylaw amendment under Article 14 of the HOA Charter, which required the board to schedule a formal membership meeting within 30 days. The meeting notice went out by email and by printed card in each mailbox, and I have to assume the subject line alone, "Special Membership Meeting Commercial Operations on Residential Properties," was enough to drive the attendance I saw when I walked in. 28 of 34 households sent at least one representative. That is the highest attendance in the history of the Maumelle Estates Community Associations. According to Larry, who told me this in a whispered aside before the meeting started as if it were a secret. The community room chairs were arranged in rows facing the folding table where Larry and Cheryl and Bob sat. I arrived with Gwendolyn, who wore a blazer and carried a leather portfolio that I knew contained, among other things, 3 Zillow-pulled property valuation reports for neighboring homes, the air quality inspection results, and a copy of the Arkansas Home-Based Business Act with 2 relevant sections flagged. Karen arrived with her husband, and a woman I didn't recognize who I assumed was the lawyer, though the lawyer didn't speak during the meeting. She sat next to Karen and took notes. Larry opened the meeting with the kind of careful bureaucratic language that is designed to make everyone feel like things are being handled fairly, while also communicating that the person speaking very much does not want to be there. He explained that the purpose of the meeting was to vote on a proposed bylaw amendment and that both the proponent, Karen, and the affected party, me, would have time to speak, and then the membership would vote. Karen went first. She had a folder too. She stood and spoke for 12 minutes. She talked about property values and neighborhood character and the disruption of having a commercial operation next door, and the traffic. She was right that Saturday afternoon had some pickup traffic. I want to be fair. And she talked about air quality, though she did not mention the inspector's readings, and she talked about the smell. She said this is a residential neighborhood 4 times. She said community standards twice. She held up a photo of the SPK 500 taken from her side of the fence, which was a genuinely impressive piece of equipment in the photograph. I'll grant her that. She sat down. The room was quiet. Gwendolyn stood. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try to be brief." She wasn't brief, but she was efficient, which is better. She went through the permit documentation. She went through the air quality readings. She read the inspector's actual recorded numbers and then noted that they were below the county's pre-installation baseline, which she'd also obtained. She talked about the Arkansas Home-Based Business Act, which provides statutory protection for licensed small food operations from HOA restrictions that would otherwise prohibit them, meaning the proposed bylaw amendment was potentially in conflict with state law. She pulled out the Zillow reports and noted that 3 properties with a clear sightline to my operation had experienced appreciation in the most recent valuation cycle consistent with or exceeding the county median. She paused. Then she said, "I also want to address the traffic concern, because I think it's the only legitimate point raised tonight." The room shifted slightly. Mr. Malone has asked me to offer, on his behalf, a voluntary written agreement to limit customer pickup hours to Saturdays between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and Sundays between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. with no commercial deliveries or large vehicle access outside those windows. He will sign that agreement tonight if the board is willing to receive it as part of the record. She sat down. There was a murmur, not a hostile murmur, more the murmur of people recalibrating. Karen stood again and made one more argument. She objected to the state law preemption claim and said it was speculative, and Gwendolyn said, pleasantly, "We're happy to litigate it if the board takes action contrary to state law," and Karen sat back down. Larry called the vote. The proposed bylaw amendment failed 19-9. I found out later, from Fuang, who had apparently been doing her own intelligence work, that Todd voted no. He voted no while sitting 3 rows behind Karen, and when the vote was read out loud and Karen's expression did not move, he very carefully did not look at her, and also did not look at me, but looked at a spot on the opposite wall with the expression of a man who has made a difficult choice and feels okay about it. Outside the community center, Larry caught my elbow. He looked like a man who had just survived something. "Derek," he said, "for what it's worth, the ribs, genuinely excellent." I gave him a loyalty card. He took it with both hands. The weeks after the hearing had a specific quality of silence. Not the silence of resolution, exactly. More the silence of a war that has been formally concluded and whose territory is being quietly renegotiated. Karen did not speak to me. She did not file any further complaints. She did not appear at my fence. I kept operating. Business kept growing. The Friday evening small batch became a regular thing. I'd do 150 pounds of ribs and shoulders on Friday evenings starting at 3, ready for pickup at 7, and the driveway would have 6 or 8 cars in it. And the Delacroix family would bring their lawn chairs, and someone would always have cold drinks, and it had, without anyone particularly planning it, become a neighborhood event. On a Saturday morning in November, about 6 weeks after the hearing, I was out back at 6 a.m. checking my briskets. The air was cold enough that my breath was visible. The SPK 500 was running steady, the exhaust stack sending a clean, pale thread of smoke straight up into a still gray sky. I had 12 briskets on, and the smell was everything it always is. I glanced over the fence. Karen was on her screened porch. She was in a fleece robe, sitting in one of her porch chairs, and she was eating a rib. Not one of mine. I recognized the packaging near her foot. She'd bought them from somewhere, Walmart or Sam's Club. The kind of ribs that come pre-cooked in a plastic tray that you heat in the oven. She was eating them on her screened porch. The porch, she had said, was ruined by smoke and smell. While the smell of 12 of my briskets and a full load of my product drifted directly over the fence and into her porch airspace, and she was staring at the SPK 500 with an expression that I can only describe as deeply privately complicated. I watched her for about 3 seconds. Then I raised my tongs, just once. Just a small neighborly salute, the way you wave at someone across a parking lot. Karen looked away. She looked at her pre-cooked rib. She took another bite. I went back to checking my briskets. Todd showed up at 10 that morning with his cooler. He'd been coming every Saturday for 3 weeks by then. I set aside a full brisket and a rack of ribs, and we completed the transaction with the comfortable efficiency of people who have found their rhythm. He was walking back toward his driveway when he stopped and turned back. "She actually loves brisket," he said, "just so you know." I looked at him. "I know, Todd." He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a thing he already knew but needed to say anyway. Then he went home. Officer Whitmore showed up for the first time in civilian clothes on the second Saturday in November. He had his wife and 2 kids with him, and he ordered a half rack and a full brisket and a pound of pulled pork, and he pulled out his wallet, and I recognized him before he said anything. "You're the deputy," I said. "Off duty," he said. "Right," I said. I ran his card. I punched his loyalty card. I gave it to him already punched twice. which is what I do for first responders. It's not a policy I advertise, but it's a policy I have. He took it and looked at it for a second. I was hoping you'd remember me, he said. You asked if I did catering, I said. I remember everyone who asked about catering. Do you? Not yet, I said, but I'm working on it. He loaded his brisket and his half-rack and his pound of pulled pork into his car and drove away, and I watched him go and thought about what a strange and complete thing had happened in my backyard over the preceding several months. Cody came over that afternoon after the last pickup. We sat on the back steps with beers, the SPK 500 cooling down behind us, the smell of a full day of barbecue hanging in the November air, like something close to contentment. We'd done this enough times, sat in backyards and talked about nothing in particular, that we didn't need to work up to the subject. You know what the funniest part of this whole thing is? Cody said. What? I said. If she'd just let you smoke your brisket, he said. None of this happens. I thought about that. I thought about the Comic Sans letter and the county exemption call and the HOA meeting with the 1994. Carpet and Phil Hartwell looking for a reason to say no, and Ricky pouring a slab for a man's vendetta, and Marlene Chu telling me not to make her regret it, and the SPK 500 floating over the fence on a rigging strap, and Todd standing at the fence in his khakis asking if he could buy a brisket, and Karen on her porch with a pre-cooked rib and a complicated expression. And I'd still be just a guy with a smoker, I said. Cody pointed his beer at the SPK 500. How's that working out for you? I looked at it for a second. Big as a compact car, stainless steel, exhaust stack catching the low November light. The county permit number I'd had engraved on the side panel, purely because I had the option and I thought it was funny. $3,840, I said. The first month. Cody took a drink of his beer. Not bad for a nuisance. Here's the thing I want you to understand, because this is not really a story about Karen, even though Karen is in it constantly. It's about what happens when someone weaponizes a system they don't fully understand against a person who goes home and reads the whole system. The outdoor burning ordinance that Karen cited? Real. Applicable to recreational and waste fires within city limits. Not applicable, explicitly not applicable, to cooking appliances. That's not a technicality, that's the law, written down. Available to anyone who looks. The HOA nuisance clause she used? Real. Applies to recreational fires and open burning. Does not apply to licensed, inspected, county-approved food businesses. Also real. Also written down. Section 12.4. 7 of the Pulaski County Zoning Code. The home-based food enterprise provision from 1974 that allowed me to run a commercial operation on a residential lot? Real. Current. Has not been superseded. Was available to anyone who looked. The Arkansas Home-Based Business Act, which provides statutory protection for licensed small food operations from HOA bylaws that would otherwise restrict them? Real. Available at ArcLeg, state.or.us. You can look it up right now. The distinction between commercial food preparation equipment and outdoor burning devices in the counties. Own 2019 Administrative Guidance. Real. Produced by the county's own Planning and Development Office. The same office where Phil Hartwell works. None of this was hidden. None of it was obscure. It was all there, in public lick documents in plain language, waiting for someone to read it. Karen picked up a weapon without knowing what it was. She filed a complaint she hadn't read the law behind. She got an HOA to send a notice without understanding what the HOA could actually enforce. She called a lawyer who sent a letter without a legal basis. At every step, she assumed the rules worked the way she believed they worked, rather than the way they were actually written. I just read the actual words. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an HVAC technician who spent a lot of nights this year on the Pulaski County Municipal Code website. What I found there cost Karen a whole lot more than a Saturday morning brisket smell, and it cost me $50 to register an LLC and the patience to read every document twice. If you've got a neighbor who thinks the rules only work one way, and you think you might be the one getting squeezed, read the rules. Read all of them. Find exemptions. Find the by right provisions. Find the 1974 Home-Based Food Enterprise Clause that nobody has used in 50 years because nobody ever needed to. And then call a contractor, pour a concrete pad, and order the biggest legal thing that fits.